Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Week 1. Finally, Greg, mercifully, the football gods have given us the NFL back in our lives, and we have a game as we tape this on Wednesday. Tomorrow night, Thursday, the season opens with the Chiefs and the Ravens, the two-time defending Super Bowl champs. And a lot of Titans fans going to be in their feelings about seeing Derrick Henry in black and
I know.
for the first time.
That'll be interesting for sure for Titans fans, but we'll see. Yeah, I would assume, and we've talked about this, Buck. I would assume there's some optimism. Let's use that word, optimism, about the Titans going into the season.
Yeah, I certainly locally there is optimism. Elsewhere, it feels like people are still skeptical, but nobody's
But
playing.
hey, that's coming off last season, that's to be expected. New coaching staff, a lot of new players. There's been a significant turnover of players, so it's obviously. So much now is speculation. That's true. I mean, even when you look at the Bears, with Caleb Williams being the #1 pick in the draft, being their starting quarterback, that's all speculation. All speculation. I mean, we can discuss for sure. We can discuss his traits, his attributes. But obviously, they've got a pretty good group of skilled position players. They've got a young and improving O-line, but his performance at this point is all speculation.
Well, and that's the difficulty for not just us in talking about these games, but in teams for game planning, because not only do you have a rookie quarterback who has played slightly in the preseason, but not hardly at all, but you have a week 1 opponent who you're going to be scouting. And for all these teams, it's, you're trying to figure out, all right, who's where, who the new coordinators are, how is this all going to look? And you're largely looking at other teams' offenses. For example, if you're game planning for the Titans, you're probably watching a lot of Bengals tape.
Well, it's funny you say that because if memory serves me correctly, I believe there's 16 new offensive coordinators and 17 new defensive coordinators. So much of that is speculation. I'll tell you one thing we do know a lot about, and I've actually watched a good amount of their tape, is the Bears defense. Their defense has many of the same players from a year ago. There's only a few players that are different. One, of course, is someone Titans fans are very familiar with, Kevin Byard, who's likely to be their starting safety along with Brisker, #9. So, the Bear defense for the most part has a lot of players, same coaching staff, and it's a good defense. We can certainly discuss that. There's much to say about it.
Yeah, I'd like to start there as we get ready for this Titans-Bears Week 1 matchup. So in particular, this Matt Eberflus defense, and as you mentioned, Jalen Johnson, who got paid in the offseason, Montez Sweat, who was an in-season acquisition last year, who helped fortify one of the better defensive fronts in football a year ago. What is conceptually, what is Matt Eberflus running, and what are some kind of tendencies that you've observed from his defense over the course of time?
Well, they're a 4-man D-line front defense in both base and sub. And in their sub defense, they're high percentage nickel. They only played 30 snaps a year ago of dime, so they do not want to take their 2 linebackers off the field. Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards, both very good players. They both stand out on tape. They're very active players. They're not a high percentage blitz defense, although their blitz percentage does increase on 3rd down, as many teams do. They use both linebackers, Edmonds and Edwards, as part of pressure packages. They also use their slot corner in nickel, Gordon. He's a very, very good player. They use him as a blitzer as well. He comes from the University of Washington. He played opposite Trenton McDuffie, who many will know because he's with the Chiefs. And Gordon, just like McDuffie, is physical, competitive. He's really good in the slot. But their 2 outside corners are very good too. You mentioned Jalen Johnson getting his money. He predominantly plays to the field. They play Tyreek Stevenson, who was a rookie a year ago, who I loved coming out of the University of Miami. He's the other corner. He predominantly plays the boundary corner. He's very physical, both as a run defender and can play press. This is a team that plays a lot of zone for the most part, but then on 3rd down, they'll play a lot of man. I've spoken to offensive coaches who say that Matt Eberflus, who's their head coach, and essentially it's his defense, that on 1st and 2nd down, you kind of know what you're getting. But on 3rd down, they're not very predictable and they present some problems.
And certainly this new look offense for the Titans, a lot of new pieces and parts. They're going to look to try and capitalize on some of that, specifically in getting them in third down situations, to try and put this new look offensive line to the test. Jalen Johnson in particular, Greg, I know a lot of people, a lot of fans tend to look
Right.
at counting stats, right? Where you go and you look up a Pro Football Reference page or something like
Yeah.
that. Jalen Johnson had 4 interceptions. You say, okay, this guy's around the ball a lot, but interceptions are one of the hardest things to kind of predict year over year. It's, in fact, I would consider it impossible to predict turnovers year over year. But how does he fit within that zone concept in particular on the early downs that they like to run?
Yeah, more often than not on early downs, it's off coverage. It's not a lot of press. The thing about both their corners, Johnson and Stevenson, is they're long and they're firm. I mean, their body types are strong. And they're physical players, even though it's not necessarily press. I mean, these guys, you just see them on tape and you go, wow, they just really look the part. Johnson is a very good player. I think that one of the other things that really stands out too when you watch their defense is the safety, Jaquan Brisker,
Mm.
because he plays. They don't play a ton of single high on first and second down. It's more two shell, but he comes down and runs the alley in the run game really, really well. I mean, he's aggressive and competitive, playing downhill in the run game from the back end. So he really stands out. I'm curious, assuming Kevin Byard is the starting safety with him, which I think will be the case, how they sort of work that out, because last year when they did play single high, it was always Brisker who came down and played in the box, and they had Jackson who played on the back end. I'm just not sure Byard can do that at this point in his career. So I think that's a question that we don't know the answer to at this point.
Well, and that would be where my follow-up would take us, Greg, because obviously you watch a lot of Philadelphia Eagles football based on where you are in the country, and I'm
Sure.
very familiar with that organization. And we have touched on the struggles that the Eagles defense had last year, Byard, of course, being a part of it as a trade deadline deal to go to Philadelphia from Tennessee. How much of it, when you watch that defense, how much of a product poor performance was just the general defense? It didn't necessarily, it looked kind of discombobulated with them trying to figure out, all right, who's the play caller? I know Sean Desai initially. I know Denard Wilson ended up here in Tennessee by different route because he wasn't the defensive coordinator in Philadelphia. So how much of Byard's, Byard's current state was a product of last year's Eagles defense versus his own depreciation as a player?
Yeah, and again, sometimes when a defense doesn't play well as a whole and it just looks, as you said, good word, discombobulated, it's tough to really say, oh, one guy, is the problem. And obviously that wasn't Byard. He got there mid-season. But I would say that last year he did not look like the player that I thought for about a 3-year period was the best safety in the league. And again, he's over 30 now. It's hard to know. Certainly has a new lease on life. He came to a team that was struggling a year ago, and it just didn't work out for either the defense or for him personally. As I said, I didn't think he looked the same. I thought they wanted him to be a man coverage defender on tight ends. He struggled with that. He just didn't look as his movement didn't look the same. Now, again, does that mean he's finished? We don't know the answer to that until he plays this year. Clearly, the Bear organization did their due diligence. I think they signed him to a 2-year deal. Is that correct, Buck? Am I right? Do you remember?
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, they clearly, again, deals are structured in many different ways. That doesn't mean he has to play 2 years, but clearly they felt he could step in and be a starting safety in a very good secondary. So we'll see how that plays out. But my point was not that he can't play anymore. I just don't think that at this point he can play consistently as a post safety. I'm not sure that at this stage in his career he can do that.
Let's shift to the offensive side of the football. And as you said, with a new coordinator and a new quarterback, schematically, we're not going to be able to break it down too much, but they do have a lot of interesting pieces who we are familiar with.
Yes.
Let's start though first with the first overall pick in this year's draft, Caleb Williams. Greg, he has shown some of the ability in the preseason, understanding that it's vanilla, of what made him the #1 overall pick. Of course, we're familiar with his body of work at USC, but from a trait standpoint, let's break down Caleb Williams for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're dealing with a guy that, throws the ball really well. The term I always use is he controls the ball extremely well. And by that I mean that his ball placement is precise, a high percentage of the time. When he delivers the football, he can place it where he wants to. I think everybody knows that he can make plays outside the structure of the offense. As the term that's often I hear used now, above the X's and O's. He can do that. I think the area he needs work, and quite frankly, this is true of many college quarterbacks, is he needs work playing within the structure of the offense and being a timing rhythm player. There were moments where he showed that in the preseason, but I think that that's something that he'll have to work on, because I think quarterbacks that have always been capable from the time they probably picked up a football of being arguably the best athlete on the field and making those kinds of plays where they move around, that is how they respond to when they feel pressure, perceive pressure, think pressure's coming, anticipate it, they tend to move. We know he can make those kinds of plays. But I think, he'll have some work to do to be a complete player, and we'll see how quickly that happens. They've got a young and improving O-line. That's an area that, a year ago, 2 years ago, when you looked at the Bears, you thought, hey, this wasn't very good. Now it's much better. One player I've always liked is their left tackle, Braxton Jones. He's a small college player. They drafted him in 2022 as a fifth-round pick. I think he's a solid left tackle. Darnell Wright, everybody knows about him, listening to me right now, from the University of Tennessee, #1 pick. I think he's a good player. They have Nate Davis, former Titan. He's going to play right guard. I think it's an improving O-line. Obviously the skill players, we know DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, the rookie, probably will be a good player. I think he will be. Keenan Allen. They've got a lot of pieces, Buck. So I think for me, the balance and how they choose to play in terms of run pass is going to be very interesting to see early on.
Well, and they bring over Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator, 3 years in Seattle. He's been around the league for quite some time at this point. Personnel is, of course, different from what he was working with with the Seahawks to now what he'll have in Chicago. But there are some interesting pieces, like you said, with this wide receiver core. They bring in Keenan Allen as a free agent. They draft Rome Odunze, who I know you and I talked about a lot.
Yep.
You would have taken any of the 3 wide receivers, it sounds like, over the 2 tackles that were around the Titans in the 7th overall pick range, and Odunze ended up going 9th to Chicago with their second first-round pick. This is a team that was second in the league in rushing last year, and understanding that the quarterback is different and a big part of that, but was the top rushing team in the NFC. I am also fascinated to see how they try and control this game. I think this is going to be a lot more running of the football on both sides of things, Greg, for both of these teams to try and get involved there. But I'm curious to see how Waldron brings some of his concepts over from the Seahawks and tries to implement them with the Bears.
Yeah, and let's not forget, too, that Waldron, before he came to Seattle, was with the Rams.
Mm-hmm.
So he does have that background with Sean McVay of running the football. My guess is, and again, as we said, it's all speculation. I would think, quite frankly, that they're not going to say to Caleb Williams, hey, let's toss it around the yard. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to throw early in the game, because you always want to get a young quarterback comfortable. So early in the game, maybe on first down, second down, first series, you might see him drop back, but they will be really defined type throws. There almost be one read or no read throws. It could be a screen, it could be boot, it could be throws, it could be an RPO, things where he's not really being asked to read, and they're quick rhythm throws. Because what you're trying to do with the young quarterback, Buck, is just get him comfortable, get him some completions early. The worst thing for a young quarterback is, to be 1 for 6, because then it feels like, man, when am I getting a completion here? And then it starts to weigh on him. But I think overall, I think there'll be a meaningful run game here. They have DeAndre Swift. They have Khalil Herbert. They have. I liked Herbert when he came out of Virginia Tech. I think he's a very intriguing player. But obviously, Swift is the #1 back. And keep in mind, they kept Mercedes Lewis as a 3rd tight end, and he's at this point a glorified tackle. And I don't think you keep him on your roster unless you plan on running the football somewhat. Doesn't mean he's going to play 30 snaps a game, but he's not there to stand on the sideline.
No, and at 40 years old, he can still get that part of the game done without question. That's something that he's proven year in and year out. So we'll see what happens in Chicago in week 1 between these 2 teams. I know the Titans fans are excited. I know excited about it. I know Bears fans are losing their minds. That place is going to be a buzzsaw. So it'll be curious to see how.
Other than Caleb Williams, it's probably not seen as a big national game, But I would say, Buck, that for someone like myself, who, of course, I live with the tactics and the schematics of the game, that's what I love. I think this is one of the most intriguing matchups of the weekend. Now, again, I don't know how it's going to play out. We're not here. I'm certainly not here to be a homer and say, go Titans. I don't know how it's going to play out. But I think just when you look at what the Bears have done, what the Titans have done with a new staff and essentially a different roster, I think it's really, really intriguing. I'm so curious to see Will Levis play this weekend. And of course, the other thing we have to keep in mind is one game for anybody playing in this game. Caleb Williams, Will Levis, whoever you want to talk about, is not a career definer.
Yes, and I think that's an important thing to continue to preach, especially
Right,
with a fan base who's dealing with a rookie left tackle getting his first start against a guy
right.
like Montez Sweat, who
And by the way, he could have some bad snaps. We've talked about that. That's
yeah.
going to happen.
In fact, that should be the expectation for all NFL rookie offensive linemen when they get to this level. There's going to be some bad snaps. Greg, I know that the NFL matchup show is back up and running. Of
Yep.
course, you can get it on ESPN, ESPN Plus, set your DVRs to make sure that you don't miss it. It's the most informative show in football, but obviously you guys aren't going to get the season opener between the Ravens and the Chiefs, the matchup show this week. So I'm curious to know what your initial thoughts about this game are. I know we've talked a lot about Baltimore, but we really haven't gotten into Kansas City. Hollywood Brown is going to miss this game. They do have Xavier Worthy to add into that passing game as well. Their defense, they lose L'Jarius Sneed, and Steve Spagnuolo continues to be one of the most feared coordinators in football for a reason. Certainly got a Lifetime Achievement Award this year for a reason. But the X's and O's, the tactics of the Ravens versus the Chiefs, what are your biggest questions?
Yeah, well, they played the AFC Championship game last year, as many might remember, and that was a game where, quite frankly, the Chiefs' defense dominated, and they dominated with pressure, which was really interesting. They had a really good percentage of pressure. It began right from the first possession. I mean, Lamar Jackson ended up with 46 dropbacks, which is probably not how the Ravens want to play. Now, obviously, Derrick Henry was not there, but the point I'm trying to make is the Chiefs rushed 5 or more on 19 of Jackson's 46 dropbacks. That's a high percentage, okay? And Jackson was only 7 for 17 for 86 yards versus their pressures. So, and on third down, they were only 1 for 6. Jackson was only 1 for 6. So that game was a real problem from a pressure standpoint for the Ravens. So look, we know Steve Spagnuolo is going to come with pressure, but let's keep one thing in mind. He had a corner that's not there anymore, who's now with the Titans, L'Jarius Sneed, and he may be, I mean, obviously we understand that Chris Jones had to get a lot of money, and he's a great, great player. That's not my point. But Steve Spagnuolo loves to play press man. He thinks that's critical. That press coverage is a critical component of playing defense now. And L'Jarius Sneed is a top 2 or 3 press corner in this league. And now he's going to have to try to figure out, who can fill that role. So we'll see how it plays out. But there's one thing we know for sure, that Steve Spagnuolo will not sit back.
I would say there's 2 things we know for sure. One is that Steve Spagnuolo is not going to just sit back, and 2, that there are not going to be 46 dropbacks for Lamar Jackson in a game where Derrick Henry is also
No, and
participating.
that's another really interesting thing to see in this game, because that may change some of the defensive fronts approaches of Steve Spagnuolo as well, because Derrick Henry is going to get, assuming the game is close, he's going to get 20 carries. I mean, he's going to be featured in that offense. They did not do that to give him 8 or 9 carries a game.
No, one would imagine not. Titans fans already a little sensitive about the Derrick Henry thing. I made a comment today on the radio show that I think he looks better in a Ravens uniform than a Titans uniform.
Oh boy, Buck, you're just getting the fan base aggravated now.
Well, what would it be? It wouldn't be sports talk radio if I wasn't aggravating just slightly, just
right. Yeah,
just a little twist the knife every once in a while.
You got to do that once in a while. Exactly.
Now that, of course, is not what you do on the matchup show, which, of course, we are looking forward to getting this first NFL Sunday underway. Just a few highlights, Greg, that people should keep an eye out for the packages and the breakdowns that you guys are going to be putting out in front.
Yeah, unfortunately, obviously, we could not do the game Thursday night or the game Friday night, which is Philly and Green Bay, 4 good teams playing that we could not do. So the games we're taking a look at in detail are Dallas, Cleveland, Minnesota and the Giants, because Minnesota's defense is really an interesting defense. And I did a piece on the defense in the show that, to be honest, I mean, I've done a lot of pieces over the years, Buck, as you know. I'm particularly proud of this one. So it's a piece on the Minnesota Vikings defense. We're doing Houston Indy, which is a very big game in that division, as you well know. I mean, that's the Titans division. That is a big week one matchup. I think we're all looking forward to seeing what Anthony Richardson looks like. Jacksonville, Miami is a big game. We're doing Arizona, Buffalo, because Buffalo is one of those teams. You know, they're in it every year, it seems. Obviously, the Monday Night Football is Jets, San Francisco, and then there's a very big NFC game. And I know maybe in Nashville they don't think about the NFC, you know, week one as much as other parts of the country, but Rams at Detroit is a very big game, and I have no problem saying right now, based on film study, and I've had this conversation with coaches as well, that the best quarterback in the NFC is Matthew Stafford.
It is such a fascinating discussion since Rodgers moved over to the AFC, Greg, because that there does seem to have been that void, right? And we, you know, at least locally, I feel like we talked about Jalen Hurts a lot. Jordan Love, will find out how sustainable his level of play is and where that ultimately ends up by the end of the year. But Stafford, you know, as long as he's healthy, right? The health thing is the thing that's bogged him down the most. There is no question that Stafford is the most accomplished and proven quarterback.
Oh, and you know, it's funny. I mean, look, everybody has their biases when they watch players. That's just built into, you know, and it's not a bias just based out of pulling something out of the air. It's probably biases based on film study over a long period of time. And I've always loved watching Matthew Stafford, even going back to when he came out of Georgia. And, you know, I remember Mel Kiper saying, and I've known Mel for years, when he came out of high school, he said Stafford will be the #1 pick in a draft 4 years from now. And he was. And he just is a great, great thrower of the football. He's super tough. I'm sure many people remember, and this is, you know, NFL Films, we do such a great job, where he got hurt against the Browns in that game, you know, and he was wired, and, you know, I think it was his shoulder, and he kept playing and threw a touchdown to win it late. He's tough as nails. I remember his first 2 years he got hurt, and everybody said he was fragile, and then he didn't miss a game for like the next 10 years, you know. So he's just a great, great thrower of the football, really intelligent, sees things. I mean, I remember last year a touchdown he threw against the Browns where they showed a particular pressure package, and he saw it right away at the line, changed the play, and hit Nakua for a 70-yard touchdown. It's just, you know, he's just a really, you used a great word, he's accomplished. You know, he's got great talent, but at this point, he's just so accomplished.
Yeah, I quickly, Greg, because I it's funny to say that I forgot about the Eagles-Packers game, but since that game is one of the biggest games, it's certainly a massive matchup in the NFC. The Packers and what they are doing, what they have been building around Jordan Love. It's a very, very young team.
Yeah.
But what is it about Jordan Love? What you saw from him, I don't know, let's call it 8 games on tape last year. What is it that you saw from him that makes you feel like he is going to continue to ascend as a player within that system?
Well, we have to understand a couple of things. Number one, just from a physical traits perspective, he's top 5 in the league. I mean, he's just physical. You know, maybe people who haven't seen a lot of him don't realize that he's 6'4" and 220 pounds.
Yeah, I don't think most people would think of him that way.
Yeah, he's got a big arm and he's athletic. And I thought one of the things that really stood out over that last stretch of the season, I mean, I think going into the playoff game against the 49ers, which they lost, I think he'd thrown like 19 touchdowns and 1 pick in his previous whatever number of games. But you could see his development through the season. He started to show a much more calculated pre-snap understanding, recognizing defenses, using his cadence, which is, you know, a veteran thing. He was forcing defenses to declare their intentions. He became a better processor and decision maker from the pocket. You could see the growth as the season progressed. I'd be surprised if he took a step back. Now, again, you know, when I say these things and then a quarterback has a bad game, people are like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, it's the NFL. I mean, the one thing, I'm sitting here, I watch tape all summer, and you watch even really, really good players get beat, whatever position they're playing. That happens in the NFL. Guys have bad games. Guys have bad plays. But you're dealing with a quarterback that has really high-level traits, and the mental development a year ago was really, really strong.
I know a lot of people don't think of it this way, and it's a cliche that coaches use that it's as old as time, but it really is just 17 one-week sample sizes of these
Oh,
guys and their respective performances. And it's easy to get caught up in the larger scale type stuff.
and you and I both know that everybody overreacts to week one. Okay. And there's always 3 or 4 games, and you know this in week one that we kind of go, oh, that's a head scratcher. How did that happen? And then the season doesn't play out that way at all. It's just that fluky week one.
Yeah. But football has a component of randomness to it that makes it just as enjoyable as anything, because you can game plan, you can study, you can do all these things, and it's a weird shaped football and it bounces a number of different
It's
ways.
just like Cam Ward's already won the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah, I have a lot of Miami fans in my life.
And by the way, it was a great performance, but I mean, that's what I was reading on Sunday. Well, he's the Heisman Trophy front runner. We've played 1 game.
Well, Greg, I like that that's been your perspective, because here all I heard was Nico Iamaleava is going to win the Heisman Trophy after a game against UT Chat. So
Well, they got a big national game this week.
NC State. It's going to be an interesting
I'm
game.
looking forward to. I want to see him. I didn't watch that game, of course. I did see the Georgia Clemson game in its entirety, and I don't know who people listening watched it, but Carson Beck he just looks like a professional quarterback.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating year of college, and certainly great to have the NFL back in our lives, buddy. It's always great. It's so nice to be able to do this with actual football.
I know.
Preseason and all this
Yeah.
other crap. Now we can get down to the business of the NFL, and looking forward to doing it for the next 18 weeks with the main man. Rate, review, subscribe if you're new to the podcast. If you're just now joining us, happy football season. Thanks for hanging out. We're happy to have any newcomers that are here. Greg and I do this every Wednesday. Buddy, we'll do this again. We'll have a lot of fun games to talk about, to both recap and preview here on the pod. Take care, Greg.
All right, thanks, Buck. Appreciate it.